Hello. In this module, we will be studying about communication. Now, this module of communication is divided into two parts, that is part 1 and part 2. The part 1 will cover elements, process and types of communication, and in part 2 we will be covering the barriers to communication and how to overcome them. So let's first understand what exactly is communication, what are its elements, what is the process and the types of communication. So, what exactly is communication? Now, this word communication has been derived from the Latin word communis, which means common. So, communication, it stands for sharing of ideas which are in common. Now, anybody knows that without communication, an organization or even an individual, they can't function at all. So, no managers can be successful without communicating effectively. So, if we have to define communication, we can say that communication is the process of passing information and understanding the same from one person to another through various verbal and non-verbal means. Now, let's look at the elements of communication. There are 6 different elements of communication. We have the sender, the message, the receiver, feedback, channel, and noise or interference. So in this particular picture, you can see we have a sender, a girl who's using a medium which is a mobile phone and sending a message to her friend which is being received by her friend who is a receiver, and the receiver, that is the friend, sends the feedback or sends the message again to the sender. And that's how they have utilized all the elements of communication, and there might be some noise in the background which might affect their communication. Now let's see what is the process of communication. The process of communication starts with the sender who creates a message, encodes it, and through a proper channel sends it to the receiver. But the receiver decodes it and then receives it. Now, when the receiver receives the message, he sends the feedback back to the sender. Now, in the whole process, we can uh, take care or we can have some kind of noise. So, we have to take care of any kind of noise that will affect our communication. So, as communication occurs, the sender and receiver, they interact by encoding, that is by sending, and by decoding, or that is receiving the messages. Now, encoding, it puts the message into words or diagrams or non-verbal signals so that it can be transmitted. And the receiver, he hears the message or reads the message or looks at the message in order to decode or interpret the message. Now, while the entire process takes place, we have to be very careful about the noise that is happening in the background of the entire communication. For example, in this particular case, the sender is asking a friend, that is Alfred, how is your sister? But Alfred receives some other message. He's able to decode some other message and says, oh, I'm fine, I went kayaking today. He's not able to receive the message being sent by the sender. He's not able to decode it properly because of the noise in the background. So one should be careful. In order to get proper communication, the noise should be minimized. Now, when we talk about the process of communication, we have to look at all the 6 elements also. So, what exactly is the sender? So, the sender is the person from where the communication begins. So, you can see in this picture, you have a girl and a boy, and the girl is the sender in this particular case, and she sends the message that your food smells delicious. Now, this was the message being sent or encoded by the girl. So message makes the connection between the sender and the receiver, and it may be made up of signs, words or movements. So in this case, she has utilized certain words, she has utilized certain movements of her hands and certain body language which makes up the message. So the tone of the voice, the inflection, the rate of the speech, the facial expression, the touching and the body movement, they all may be misinterpreted by the receiver. So in this case, the receiver is the boy, and he says thanks, which is the message he is saying, but he's decoding it differently. That is, he is decoding the message as she wants to try a bite. Just because she said your food smells delicious, he is decoding it as she wants to try a bite of what I'm eating. So it has been a misunderstanding, it has been poorly constructed and received poorly by the receiver. So the message the sender meant to send is not always the message which is received. Now, the third element of the communication process is the receiver. But do you know how we receive messages? It's 55% of the body movements, 38% of the volume and the pitch, and only 7% of the words that make up what kind of message is being received. So, when we talk about the receiver decodes or interprets the message to achieve understanding, which is basically dependent on the background of the receiver, his experiences all his life, the beliefs and concerns he had all his life, and that will make up how he receives the message that is being sent by the sender. The fourth element is the feedback. Now, when the message is being decoded by the receiver, he sends a feedback to the sender. So, it's the receiver's response to the sender's message, telling the sender how their message is being received and helping the receiver confirm whether their perception of the message is right or not. So, basically, feedback provides three functions. It provides the continuity in the conversation. Second, it indicates the effective understanding or misunderstanding of the message. And third, it stimulates further communication or further discussion. So these are the three basic functions of the feedback being provided by the receiver. Now, the next element is the channel through which the message is being passed. So, a communication channel is basically the means of technique which is used to convey the message. It could be a normal conversation, face-to-face conversation. It could be through a letter, a telephone call, email, or even a television program. So, there are different kinds of channels of communication which are present and which can be used in an organization or in the day-to-day life. The sixth element of this process is the noise. Now, the message which is received is not necessarily the same which is the message that is sent. We saw in the earlier examples. So, the noise or the interference that interrupts the message or communication flow between sender and receiver, it can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. As you can see in this particular conversation, the girl is trying to, sender is trying to conversate with the receiver, but at the same time there are different noises which are coming in both the places and which is affecting the overall communication process. The girl is thinking about, there is a email which is beeping, or there is a dog which is barking, or even a coffee smell that makes her that could act as a noise. Okay, and at the same time the receiver is being distracted by a bell at the door or a phone call, or even thinking about something that he must send that email. So it is affecting the entire conversation that is taking place between these two individuals. So noise should be minimized if you want an effective communication. Now let's see what are the different types of communication. We have segregated the types of communication on three bases. That is, on the basis of relationship, we have a formal and informal type of communication. On the basis of flow or direction, we have four types of communication. We have downward, upward, we have horizontal, and we have diagonal communication. Then, on the basis of media or expression, we have written communication, oral communication, and non-verbal communication. So in the pictures here, you can see different types of communication. You can see formal communication, you can see informal communication, you can see non-verbal communication or written and oral communication. So these are the different types of communication that can take place in an organization or otherwise. So on the basis of relationship, we have informal and formal communication. Now when we talk about informal communication, informal communication is less rigid. It has a more flexible and relaxed tone. It uses more of a casual language, and there is less emphasis on the grammar and spelling. And we use informal communication with our peers and the people that we know very well. And it's mostly used in the personal situation. But when we talk about formal communication, it is more rigid. it has a more formal tone, it uses more of a standard language, there is more emphasis on grammar and spellings. Then you use it with your non peers or people you don't really know well, and it's mostly used in business, career, and educational situations. Now, when we talk about informal communication, we talk about grapevine. Now, what is grapevine? These are the informal communication threads that basically flows in the organization. Now, grapevine, it has three main characteristics. First of all, the grapevine is not controlled by management. Second, it is perceived by most employees as more believable and more reliable than formal communication, which is issued by the top management. And thirdly, it is largely used to serve the self interest of those people within it, and it is the quickest means of communication. So, grapevine is also important in an organization, and grapevine can be of four types. We can have a single strand grapevine where one person communicates with another person through a series of people. So, they can be A, B, C, another people. So, X is telling A is telling B is telling Y. That is how a grapevine can flow. Or Mr. X can go for a gossip kind of grapevine where he non selectively communicates with everybody. He's telling everybody about the communication or about the message that he wants to convey. Or he can go for a probability kind of grapevine model where he can randomly communicate with some people, and so, might leave out on some other people based on the laws of probability. Or he can go for the cluster kind of grapevine in which he communicates with those he can trust, or those he cannot trust, he can leave them out. So it is a non probabilistic kind of model. So grapevine is also important, and it's an informal communication style. Now, on the basis of flow or direction, we have four types of communication. We have downward communication. When we talk about downward communication, here the process, basically the communication is flowing from the supervisor to subordinate. Now, when we talk about downward communication, and if you want to improve it, you have to, the managers, they must present job instructions clearly to the subordinates, explain why things need to be done in a particular way, so that people can perform the jobs that they understand that better. Now, for example, you can have rules, you can have handbooks, procedure manuals. These are all forms of downward communication that is done by the top level to the lower levels. The second one is the upward communication. It's the flow from the subordinate to the superior. So from lower levels of hierarchy to the upper levels, when it flows, it is upward communication. And in order to improve upward communication, it is important for the people to reduce the status difference. You have to detect the biases when they occur, and you have to create a good climate in which the members can communicate both the positive and the negative messages, and try to provide quantified data rather than providing subjective information, so that the decision making becomes easy for the upper management. So, for example, instituting a suggestion scheme, or union leader voicing their demands to the management, these are all types of the upward communication that takes place in an organization. The third type of communication can be horizontal communication. Now, horizontal communication, also known as lateral communication, it takes place between and among members who are at the same level in the organization. For example, it can take place between two supervisors of the same department, or different department are discussing work matters with each other. And to improve lateral communication, it is desirable to establish openness and trust among members of various departments, create a kind of a, let's say, reward system that can facilitate interdepartmental cooperation, and we can learn from other departments what they are doing through interdepartmental meetings. And also we can design the organization structure in such a way that we get greater opportunities for interdepartmental contact. Okay, so horizontal communication should also be motivated in an organization. Then we have diagonal communication. Now, this type of communication usually takes place under special circumstances. It's not very common, and it basically is the flow of message between persons who are in different positions at different levels of the hierarchy, and also in different departments. Right. So these are the four types of communication communication models based on the flow or direction. Then we have the communication pattern based on the media or expression. So we have written, oral, and non-verbal communication. When we talk about written communication, we are talking about the communication that is taking place through written signs or symbols. So it could be the memos, reports, it could be the emails, and it could be bulletins, postcards. All these are forms of written communication. Now the advantage of written communication is that it is permanent, it is tangible, and you can verify it, so it's verifiable. Now, the next one is the oral communication or the verbal communication. Now, this is the communication that is conveyed orally, and it is the advantage. It takes place in the face-to-face conversations, group discussions, telephone calls. So, the advantages of this kind of communication is that you can get immediate feedback in this case. There's a personal touch involved. You can do group communication at the same time. There's a level of secrecy because it's not written. Whatever you've said, people might not note it, and they might forget it, or they have nothing to really put that again. So it's kind of it can maintain secrecy, and at the same time it is economical in terms of time and money. So oral communication is that. Now next is the non-verbal communication. Now when we talk about non-verbal or gestural communication, it's basically communicating with your body movements through some gestures, and you can do it through your eye contact, through facial expressions, through gestures, through posture, and also through the distance between two individuals. So these are the various forms of communication or the types of communication. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.